What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 130 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where two best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined, as always, my very good friend and co-host, making his return to the show, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, buddy. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Came back on a bit of a downer week, but it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's like, definitely not news that I'm excited about, but I was like, oh man, Steve's back, and there's big news. So we got something to discuss. We got something to chew on. I'm not happy about it, but at least we're here to talk through it together. You know,
Yeah, 2024 is off to a pretty bad start for the industry by
man,
the looks of it.
it's not even March. It's not even
I know,
March, and we
I
got to talk
know.
about a massive layoff and multiple canceled games, and of course, it's happening over at PlayStation. It has been We've been talking about PlayStation a lot this year, and very little of it has been positive, and it is such a bummer to see another negative update here for one of our platform holders. But let's walk everybody through it. That's what we're talking about today, right? We
Mhm.
know a few big pieces of news have come out of it, right? So to not bury the lead, what we know right now is that PlayStation is looking to lay off around 900 people, and this is going to be across all of their studios and departments worldwide. They As part of that, they are going to be fully closing London studio, who is most recently known for working on a lot of VR projects. They historically were connected to like the SingStar franchise and some of those other things. So that's obviously a big hit to see an entire studio go down. It's been really well, I was gonna say it's been a really long time, but actually, now that I'm remembering it, they closed Pixel Opus like a year or two ago. So it had been a really long
Mhm.
time, and now we've had two shutdowns in the last, whatever, year and change, which is a real big bummer. And then in addition to that, we know that these layoffs have also hit Insomniac, Naughty Dog, and Guerrilla, which is insane because those are three of Sony's four most successful studios.
Yeah, also hit FireSprite, right? Another VR focused studio, which was one of their later
Yeah.
acquisitions. So you got to be
And
imagine that team's
FireSprite not
feeling it.
gone, but they are being hit with they had a project canceled, and they've had a undetermined amount of staff laid off so far. So we'll get
Yeah.
into more of the specifics of some of this stuff. All this broke from Jason Schreier's reporting, deeply unsurprising. So we'll have a link down to his full report that you can check out over on Bloomberg. But he originally broke the story over on Twitter, starts making the rounds, and then we kind of start getting more of the nitty-gritty details. So let's talk about some of those things, right? So uh these cuts represent 8% of Sony's overall employees. So like it's a pretty massive cut, right? Nearly 10% of the overall workforce of the company is certainly nothing to sneeze at. There was a statement from Jim Ryan, who I was thinking about this the other day. You and I were talking. I thought he was gone already. I didn't realize he's still kicking around.
Me too. I thought he left like end of January. I guess it's the end of February he's leaving.
Yeah, and it's so funny because we both talked about this like a couple of weeks ago, and it's like, yeah, what's going on? We haven't heard about like who's stepping into, and I guess that's why. But that's fine. So what Jim said, this was an internal note that went out to staff. He said, quote, after careful consideration and many leadership discussions over several months, it has become clear changes need to be made to continue to grow the business and develop the company. So that obviously, oh,
What a
you
bizarre
there
thing,
you go.
like, honestly, like, why I mean, I get it, he's the CEO, right? He's not gonna be here to drive the ship and, like, know what changes need to be made to continue to grow the business, like, it's just an absolutely canned statement
Yeah,
that if you've been laid off or if you're on one of these teams, that's not gonna feel great. You know he's out the door with a nice
no.
big golden parachute and a fat pension as he retires, and you get probably sweet fuck all.
Yeah, or best case scenario, a couple months, right? To like
Yeah.
figure out if you're gonna have to relocate your entire life. Like go read go read Jason Schreier's book Press
Yeah,
Reset,
well, I
right?
feel I've seen a couple of people, on Twitter talking about the fact that they're now gonna lose their visas because 'cause they're, in the UK, for example, on, like, a visa that allows them to work at
Right.
London studio. That studio's closed down. Their wife
FireSprite's
was with
also
them.
UK based, right? So it's
Yeah.
like that could also be the case. It's like
Their
and that
wife was with them as a dependent, so she's losing her visa too, and they've now gotta move back to, like, a different country
Mhm.
or uproot their whole life. It's just like, this has real detrimental human effect
Yeah,
that people don't
absolutely.
necessarily think about.
And I think what frustrates me is because there's the obvious human cost of like what this does to people, and I absolutely do not mean to minimize that by establishing another point. Again, Jason Schreier's book Press Reset is literally entirely about how studio closures uproot people's lives, and up until recently, right? Like many folks did not even have the opportunity for things like remote work. Like it's like you'd lose your job and then you got to move to another state or another country or wherever you can find work. And right now,
Mhm.
that's obviously tougher than ever, right? All these companies are laying people off. It's not like there's this big hiring spree going on right now. So I think what is so devastating is a lot of this talent is going to just leave the industry because again, you uh referencing Jason's book again, so many people end up really talented people, right? End up leaving game development forever because of shit like this. Because at the end of the day, if you're a programmer, you can make a lot more money doing something else and have more
Yeah,
stability and not have to, have your life be at the whims of, like these bean counters. And, I'd like to address some common things I've seen in Twitter threads or stuff we've talked about in the show in the past, right? Because we've talked a lot about profitability of Sony's games and the margins and
mhm,
how they're going to work on those things and yada, yada, yada. All well and good, right? I think we can, on some level, acknowledge that PlayStation probably needs to make an adjustment to how much they're investing in games and what the returns that they get on them are. Fair enough, right? I understand that some level of restructuring is going to happen. And especially, and we'll talk about this more in a second, right? Them laying off some of these people, I think is directly connected to their changes in plans for investments in VR and investments in live service games, right?
massively.
And I think
Those are
that's
the
obvious.
2 big things, clearly, that was Jim Ryan's vision, was games as a service. We'll get the next iteration of PSVR out. PSVR clearly been a failure. They're pivoting that product to allow it to work with PC. I think that just goes to show
Too
that they
little, too
know they're
late.
not. Yeah, they're not selling enough of these things to work with the minimal number of games that they've got available on the PS5, and they're shutting studios working on VR games. They don't care about that product anymore. That's why
Oh,
they're
they're
just
giving
like,
up.
well, if you own one, use it on your PC. We'll move on to something else. And games as a service, we've heard about. We've heard publicly from Naughty Dog that they're canceling that project, and reinvesting their resource into other games that what they're
Let's
used to.
let's talk about that for a second. So, head of PlayStation Studios Herman Holst said in his own internal note on Tuesday that the company has also decided to cancel several games in development, which I think pretty clearly is the cause of many of these layoffs, right? Because even at the studios that we just listed, right, of Insomniac, Naughty Dog, Guerrilla, we know that obviously those are three of their most successful studios with Spider-Man, with The Last of Us, with Horizon. We also know all three of those studios are working on multiplayer games that are either confirmed to be canceled or believed to be canceled, right? That's probably where these layoffs are coming from. And I've seen folks be like, if even your best studios are not safe from layoffs like this, what are we even doing? And I think I definitely agree with that in principle, where it's like, I don't think you should be in the business of laying people off when you're trying to, contract, right? During a time of you being concerned about there being tumultuous times ahead, right? And I think it's super easy to do this, and it's not a novel thing for me to do, but I
Mhm.
can't help but think back to 2015 when Satoru Iwata cut his salary to save people's jobs, right? And you see no such effort from the upper management at PlayStation. In fact, there was a tweet that was making the rounds of Jim Ryan visiting London studio 5 fucking days ago and taking a picture with the staff there and everything, right? And it's like, and then laid all these people off. And it just feels bad, right? Because it's like, I get it. I understand all of the counter arguments that anybody who's business minded is about to make. But guess what? People are what makes games, right? Like that talent that you invested in, that is the studio. And laying people off as a cost cutting measure is short sighted because you're going to spend just as much money, if not more, rehiring people and training people when it's time to build up for your next fucking project. That was supposed to be the entire impetus behind these like Last of Us Part 1s and Last of Us Part 2s and those kinds of projects, was that you would keep people employed during the lean periods. And like, it is so disappointing to not see them making that attempt. And maybe the argument there is that the people they hired are people with expertise in live service games, and that's what they want to work on. And that's what they don't have the skill set to come in and work on the next single player Naughty Dog game. I don't know. But the idea that they needed to lay off 8% of people in the company to close this gap, I think is not realistic, right? Like it was a in my estimation a decision that's based on greed. And I think you can look at, again, we talked about the margins, we talked about how they missed targets for the PlayStation 5 a couple of weeks ago. That's all well and good. Do you know what else is important context? The quarter preceding that was still a record-setting quarter for PlayStation, right? I have this is here from Eurogamer, but I also have a tweet from Stealth over on Twitter that summarizes it better, and I can give you the link to the article if you want to go check his facts. But the what he said was, reminder that last quarter PlayStation announced record-breaking revenue, and while operating income was down, they still made $572 million. PlayStation isn't in any kind of trouble at all. This is about the quest for endless upward growth and greed. And that's what it comes down to, man, is like, I'm so frustrated that the pandemic and everybody being forced inside, causing that artificial boom for the games industry, is now causing all of these companies to, rather than planning for the fact that eventually margins were going to go back down, to be like, nah, we're just going to keep growing and growing and growing because that's what capitalism does. And then what is the cost? It's all these people losing their fucking jobs because of mismanagement, because they're overspending and overinvesting and not planning for the eventuality of like, we're hiring all these people and we need to keep supporting them and we need to keep supporting them, because they know that they can just lay a bunch of people off and it doesn't matter. And the only people that get hurt are the
But
people that they laid off, not them, not their profit margins, not any of the C-suite executives. No, it's those folks in London that now have to go and find another job and uproot their
mhm.
lives. And they just don't care. And like, we talk about this all the time, right? Like, these companies are businesses. I get it. Businesses exist to make money, yada, yada, yada. It's so frustrating to have this. This is an art form. Like, this industry is about making and selling art. And that, like, there's no thought given to the cost of just laying off creatives that are the people that make the fucking product is crazy to me. It's so crazy because you can fucking read Jason's book and see how much money it costs to hire people and how much effort it takes to hire people and bring them in and teach them things. And it's
I
just
mean,
so
I don't think you
short-sighted.
even need to. I don't think you even need to look at Jason's book. You just have to look over the other side of the fence of when Microsoft went through the same process. They shut down studio after studio after studio, and it left them in a position where no one wanted to buy their consoles anymore because they had no exclusive games, or they had no games at all, really. Um, and because of that, they ended up having to buy a bunch of studios at great cost, and that's a cost that I don't think Sony could afford. I mean, it's
Oh,
worth noting that while their Q3 was up year on year, probably because of Spider-Man 2 and the holiday season coming up, that their 12-month profit was, or their 12-month income was down. It was at 1.56 billion compared to 2 billion a year ago. And I can see why they would want to kind of just kind of make check of what's going on. Why is it down by half a billion? dollars. That's a lot of money, and maybe make some adjustments because
Yeah,
why are they investing all this money into live service? Why are they investing all this money into PSVR 2? And as much as I kind of agree with you that, yeah, laying people off sucks, is a real human cost, you can't just keep putting money into a sinking ship. Like
for sure.
PSVR 2, it did not work for them. It was a good experiment. People just weren't interested in the product. It was too expensive. There weren't the games there. And I don't think they can correct that quick enough. When it comes to live service, it was a bad play and it was not the right move. And maybe with smaller titles like we've seen with Helldivers 2, right? It could work for them. I think if they do go multi-platform with those kinds of games, it could really work for them.
Well, and again,
You've
right, but
got
like Helldivers is also a game made by a team that makes this kind of game, right? Like, and
mhm,
granted, they haven't made like this specific kind of game where it's like a bigger multi-platform live service type thing, but like making arcadey shooters is like that's their bread and butter. It's not like, hey, let's take Naughty Dog, who's known for these great dynamic single player experiences, and then have them develop a live service game. And I know people loved factions. I know there was passion from Naughty Dog to work on that. I'm not saying that it was like this mandate or something from down on high, but it's like you see all these projects that were in development at single player studios, and you have to wonder, like, and I don't know, I guess it was just a gamble that that was going to pay off, right? That you would invest all that money and you get that return. But, you and I always thought that seemed dubious at best.
yeah, yeah, it was a strange play at the
Oh, hey,
time. I never
you're
under
pause, 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 pause. I can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
You're still talking. Like I can see you in the monitor, the confidence monitor, but on video, you're paused.
Okay.
Can you
Alright,
maybe
let me refresh the
like
page.
refresh, like log out and log back in or something?
Hello? Any better?
There you go. Now I can hear you. Pick up from where I said the dubious at best thing. Oh wait, you're muted again.
Am I? Hello?
No, now it's fine. I don't know what's going on.
Are you sure I'm okay? Yeah?
Yeah, you're definitely okay. Talk again.
Okay. Hello,
Yeah,
hello.
you're
Is
still coming
this
through. We
working?
should be okay. We should be okay.
What did you say? Just give me
The
context.
last thing I
Dubious at
said,
best?
the last thing I said was, I was talking about how big single player studios like Naughty Dog and Guerrilla and Insomniac are working on these single player or these multiplayer games, and that I know that people liked factions and that there was
Mhm,
passion at Naughty Dog to make a multiplayer game, but so I'm not arguing that it's like it was this mandate from down on high that they had to do this. But I think when you look at the fact that all of these historically single player studios were then working on these big multiplayer games, it's like that seems like such a crazy strategy. And I guess the gamble was that that investment would pay off, and that a couple of those games would hit, and that those studios would become overall more profitable because they
mhm,
had a live service game or two. And I said the thing I left off on was I think you and I have always agreed that that kind of as a strategy seems like dubious at best.
mhm. Yeah, it's a weird strategy for me because they bought Bungie for Destiny and live service. That game has not been doing well, and Bungie had to make mass layoffs for the
The mo-
exact same reason.
is the most overpriced acquisition I think in like the history of media. If I'm honest with you.
Yeah, it's bizarre, but they had a studio there that focused on live service, and to then get every other studio kind of in their roster to work on live service games just seemed like a really strange strategy. I mean, maybe these companies I could see Insomniac wanting to kind of do the Great Web or whatever it was called in the league. I can imagine that that was a concept that they had internally. Um,
Dude, I'm sorry. I'm with you. I want you to finish that thought. I just wanted to look up how much Disney spent on Star Wars as like a point of comparison. They spent
nothing.
$4 billion on Star Wars. You're telling me that
Yeah.
Bungie is worth almost as much as Star Wars?
They got
Okay.
Indiana Jones along with that as well.
Yeah, that was for Lucasfilm, right? So it's not even just Star Wars.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, it's like, what are you fucking
you get a
kidding
lot.
me? What are you
I know, it's
kidding me?
crazy.
For what? For Destiny? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, very, very strange, purchase indeed. Um, but we know also
Marvel was
that
only 4 billion too.
I
That's
know that
crazy.
both of those were,
Are
like,
you kidding me?
bargains, yeah,
Yeah,
and,
that's
like,
nuts.
And now they're subbing it out and making games with both of those franchises as
Yeah.
well, which makes
You
a
gotta
lot
be
of sense.
kidding me. What was Sony thinking?
Yeah,
They could have bought
I don't know.
so
It's such a it really felt like it was a Jim Ryan strategy. It was like, "Oh, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go down this route." It hasn't paid off. Maybe they gave him a couple of years to kind of get some of these games out because it was on their financial reports for a while that, "Oh,
Yeah.
we've got 5 live service games coming." Maybe MLB The Show was one of them, maybe Destiny's another, but we've got other ones
Yeah.
coming up. I think Helldivers 2 probably turned out to be one of them, but, we've not
Which,
seen
like,
any of the others.
and I wanna say this because you and I have not really had a chance to talk about Helldivers. That worked, right? Like,
Yeah.
that worked. That clearly worked.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think PC Day and Date was the right strategy there,
yeah,
big
fucking
time.
clearly, right? It was like a huge game on Steam. Absolutely.
Mm.
And I mean, we've been talking about that forever. Like, I think that's gotta be the fucking standard for multiplayer games. Like, you have to release cross-platform, I think, if you wanna have any chance of surviving. Because it's like, who even knows if Helldivers will still be what it is by the end of the year, or is it gonna be a game that comes and goes? I don't know that it will.
Probably
It
it
seems like it
probably will come and go, but they made $40 a piece off of all the sales. They have
yeah.
had, like, 800,000 concurrent
Well,
players
and, like, they
almost
have a season
continuously.
plan, so it's like, it might not stay massive, but I think it will probably survive long enough to be, like, a thing, and that's all it needs to
Yeah,
be, right? Like, that's fine. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think, like, trying to expect that from every studio in your portfolio just doesn't make sense. It does make sense for you to partner with a smaller studio that wants to make that kinda game anyway and make it a PlayStation exclusive or whatever, like, that's great, but, like,
I still don't see how they can go down the PlayStation exclusive route by still wanting to do what, I think it was Hiroki Totoki said that they wanna kind of improve margins on these games and these
and they need
products
to they
because
need to spend less on making them is the thing,
yeah,
and
they do. Because you look at Nintendo, you look over the fence at Nintendo. They had an operating income of 4 billion. It was more than double PlayStation's on fewer sales. They sold less Switches and they sold less software, versus the PlayStation 5 last year,
Mhm.
and yet they made more than double
Think about it.
the profit.
They're selling the Nintendo Switch at a profit, right? Like,
Mhm.
Sony had to raise the price to maintain profitability, and you think about I mean, and we don't know how much Nintendo spent on Tears of the Kingdom, but I know it wasn't $200 million, right? Like, I know it didn't cost what it cost to make Spider-Man because it doesn't like, it's just not reaching that same level of graphical fidelity. You're not, having to use actors in the same way. Like, there's just a lot less technology in terms of, like, and not to undercut the technology and play it Tears of the Kingdom, right? Obviously, that game is so incredibly well optimized, and it's
Yeah,
in
but it's not like it's not cutting edge. It's not, "Oh, we got ray tracing
for
in here. We're
graphics
doing X, Y,
and
Z."
stuff.
Yeah, it's
It's
not in
cutting
terms of
edge
graphical
with
fidelity, not
gameplay,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's the thing, though, right? We talk about this all the fucking time. Like, it's like games don't need to cost this much. Games don't need to look as good as they do. They really just don't. And like,
Well, just look at I mean, I think they need to look at Helldivers, right? It was a small third-party studio that published it through PlayStation Studios. Wouldn't have cost anywhere near $250 million to make, and yet it's done so extremely well for them
and it's a
that it's
budget title. It's selling at
yeah.
$40. Like, that's awesome. That's probably a big part of why people jumped into it, right? Like, they got to see that. They got to see that that's what you need to do, right? Like, okay, so you're spending $200 million on them. That's too much. Bump that down to 150, right? Bump it down to I don't know,
Bump it
125.
down to 150, and I still think $70 is a big ask for a lot of people to jump on a game at launch. I
Yeah.
really do.
But that's the thing. I don't think that's negotiable. I don't think you can make games cost less. I just don't think you can. And like, we've talked about this a lot. This is like a regular point of conversation on the show.
But no,
Video
I mean,
games used to cost a
I'm a
lot more. They used to cost
I
a
know,
lot
yeah, I
more.
know.
And I
But
think we
I
need to
think
potentially get comfortable with the idea that buying a game day and date at full price is a privilege. And it's not something that you can just always do because games cost a lot more than they used to.
mhm.
And it just is what it is, right? Like, there's a conversation I had with Sarah the other day because I was watching a documentary about the 90s and video games, and there was a fucking screenshot of like Walmart or something, like a Target or whatever, and it was showing what games cost, and they cost over $80,
Yeah, but
right?
you know what I could do back in the 90s? I could go to Blockbuster, I could rent a game for a weekend for like 5 quid,
You can go to
and I could
Redbox.
play the game.
You could go to
They
Redbox.
don't that doesn't exist at, like, anywhere outside of the US, like, that's not an option for us in the UK. I mean, we could buy used games, like, that's an option, but
Yes.
games shutting down their used games,
Right.
trade in here, that's going away. Digital only is gonna be the kind of strategy moving forwards. I think they need to look at it and think, and I think maybe the studios can support 1, maybe 2 of these $70 blockbuster titles a year, but it's gotta be backed up with these smaller titles, these, like, $40 smaller titles. They kind of laid the groundwork for it with Uncharted Lost Legacy,
I agree.
and yet we've not really had any of those in the PlayStation 5 era,
Not
even.
enough. We have had them, but it's been miles. And it's like, okay, so why is that the only one, right? Like
Yeah,
why isn't there and the argument could be that some of them are in development, right? Like it's like we had God of War come out, maybe there is like a point five God of War game in
I don't think
development.
so. We just got the big update with the roguelike mode on there. I don't think we're gonna get anything else out of God of War for a while.
I wouldn't be sure about that. I wouldn't, but you might be right, you know. I guess it's just tough to say because I don't know how long it takes to make these games when you're making them for PS5, right? We know games take a lot longer to make now, so maybe even a shorter game takes a couple years. That game only came out what 2 years ago, so it's like
Something like that, yeah.
so say they started active development right after that. I mean, maybe it's a 3 year
May
development
Maybe,
cycle.
but we know we're not gonna see it this year
No,
because we know
right?
they've not got any games
But
in
again,
existing
if it
franchises coming
and
this
again,
year.
I'm just literally pulling these numbers out of my ass for napkin math. Say it's a 3 year development cycle. That would be next year.
Mm.
It's not impossible is my point, right? Like Spider-Man just came out. The idea that we could get a Spider-Man 2 equivalent to Miles Morales, that's still in the cards, I think. It's just, whether or not it happens is a big question. And I think the point that you just made is a really salient one though, of the idea of like maybe what publishers need to do is move away from these like you get one big blockbuster game like Spider-Man a year and then the rest of the stuff that you get supported by is maybe there's one big blockbuster from a third party like Final Fantasy last year and Final Fantasy this year, and you get
Mhm.
a smaller budget title here and there, maybe one of
Like a
those
remaster
multiplayer,
in there like they're doing with Until Dawn, you
and with
know?
The Last of Us Part 2 that just came out,
Yeah.
right? Like it's like at the end of the day, they have a good number of releases. It's just I think a lot of them are not like sexy, right? And something I wanted to bring up. Uh, I just did a conversion. So in 1991, when Street Fighter 2 came out, right? And maybe it's even a year or two later because that might be the arcade release cartridge. It cost $70 in 1991. In today, that's $160. So I really, really don't want to hear that video games cost too much money. Like we need
I genuinely think they do though, because you bought 1 game a year then, and, like, if they were expecting to sell 1 game a year to people, sure, charge $160, but they're not. They want us to buy 3, 4, 5, 6 games so they can maximize their profits, and they wanna keep selling us
I
games.
think
They wanna
that's
sell us one a month if they
I think
can.
that's more on them though than it is on us, right? Of like I don't think it's a problem if games cost $70 if there's not the expectation that we need you to buy 5 $70 games a year to stay afloat. That's bad planning, right? Like to me. And it's like and again, right? Like when I'm saying what I'm saying, if you think $70 costs too much, that's fine. I'm not arguing that like you need to be comfortable with this or that or whatever, but it's like that's what they cost. And I think to
Mhm.
argue that they cost too much ignores how much every other form of entertainment costs. It ignores what video games have historically cost, and it ignores that there was not an increase in price for like a generation plus in many key markets.
I do understand that, but I
It's
do also think that it is economies of scale. I mean, they weren't selling millions of copies of Street Fighter on SNES. They were probably selling 100,000 at most. They're
sure.
selling millions and millions of copies, and most of the time, they're not having to even print a disc, ship it anywhere, deal with retailers. They're just selling it to you, and they're getting 100% of the
Yeah.
profit. And what's even weirder is that their games are cheaper on PC, and I still don't understand that. I don't think I ever will understand that
No, that doesn't
strategy.
make any sense to me. It really doesn't. I no excuse for that for sure. And even so, right? Like, I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to provide you context, right? Where
Mhm.
it's like I would love if video games cost less money.
Yeah, I
And
mean, the
also,
the the fact is the majority of games I buy do cost less money. I don't really buy that many of these big blockbuster games. I play mainly indie games or I play something smaller. I do think Xbox has done a really good job with the smaller titles. Maybe they haven't done a good job of marketing them, and that's why we're seeing the Pentiments, the Groundeds, the Hi-Fi Rushes breaking out of the Xbox ecosystem.
I
Because
mean,
you're
and I'm
right.
worried about that because they're like, oh, we're doing this so that they're more profitable. And it's like, okay, so are you saying that it's a problem that they didn't make more money? Because I thought that was the whole point of you, the
Yeah.
massive angel investor company, coming and buying these small creative studios, was that you were going to just let them do whatever you wanted. And it kind of seems like that's not going to be the case anymore if you're already talking about how they didn't make enough money and we've made it through one round of games at all these studios.
Mhm.
Not
I
great.
don't necessarily think it's that those games specifically didn't make enough money. I kind of feel like it's they weren't. I think it goes back to what you were saying, right? They're not the big sexy titles. They're not the Forzas or the Halos. They're the games
He
that
said
kind of get lost
they're
in the
not
mix.
console sellers really for
Yeah,
most people.
yeah. So why not kind of bring them out on other platforms in the same way that I really think Helldivers should be on Xbox. It would be a fantastic title cross-platform, and they could make a shit more money. But I don't think they ever will do that, at least not for the foreseeable future. Um, but it's a real shame. Like, it is a real shame that they've kind of had to, or they felt like they've had to cut 8% of their staff worldwide. And I would imagine the London studio closure is probably the lion's share of that, losing hundreds of people.
Yeah, and I think the shittiest thing about it is, like, that makes sense, right? Is, like, for me, it's way easier for me to wrap my head around they closed down a studio that specifically makes VR games when they don't wanna make VR games anymore. Fine. But, like, man, like, 40 people at Guerrilla are losing their jobs, and I guess that's probably because these online Horizon games that we've heard about are not gonna get made.
Oh,
Fair
yeah,
enough.
remember the leak of the chibi weird, like,
Like
chibi
Monster
Aloy?
Hunter kinda
Yeah.
style one, and then there was supposed to be another one too. There was supposed to be 2, right? There was gonna be an
Mhm.
MMO and that game, and it's like, we probably don't need both of those, that's fair, but, like, there's nowhere else you can put these people, you know? They can't go work. I don't know. They just laid a bunch of people off at Bungie, so maybe not.
Okay,
I don't know.
yeah. They're not making live service games anywhere, and that's the problem. If you're working on, say you're a programmer who's working on networking, well, where are you gonna go within the Sony Studios family?
Yeah,
Because
they just don't
no
have
other
work for you.
they don't have any. There's nothing there for
Yeah.
you anymore.
But so that's what's like, that's crazy to me, though. You tell me 8% of their staff was working on live service games?
Or
Why did they
VR.
why yeah, I guess, right? But, like, why would you invest that much in those things then if they're this
I mean,
volatile?
that's what they were talking about, right? How much were they gonna make invest? It was like
It was several billion
billions.
dollars. It was like
Yeah.
$6 billion over, like, 3 or 4 years or something like that, I forget, but it was a lot of
It
money.
was 55% of PS5 game development was gonna be live service. 2.16 billion in a single year. That's not worked out for them, has it?
No, not at all, right? And I don't know.
And that's in addition to the 3.7 billion they spent on Bungie. That's not including that. Like, that's there,
Yeah.
and that's
So
been a massive failure for them.
no,
Marathon's
that was
delayed.
just a money pit. I genuinely would not be surprised if Bungie ends up getting closed down because they are just
Well,
not.
I said that it's one of my predictions that PlayStation will own them by the end of the year. They're closed down, they don't own them anymore. So I'm taking that one as a win.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's tough because I mean, we've talked a lot about like the issue of the margins on these single player titles that are kind of Sony's bread and butter and like, I don't know. I think it's like they've got to figure it out whether it's spending less money on these games or accepting that maybe some of upper management doesn't need to make the salaries that they're making to
Well,
maintain
or what Hiroki
profitability.
Toki was saying is explore other platforms.
Yeah, but I mean, I just don't know that that's gonna like. I don't know. We you and I go back and forth on this all the time, right? So it's like, I don't
So
want
what
to.
else do you do? Say your game's been out for 2 years, right? Say it's Ratchet and Clank, and maybe you don't put the headline titles like Spider-Man on Xbox, but Ratchet and Clank, it's been out since launch. It was out in 2020. It's been to PC.
I just don't know,
Why not?
is that really gonna make that much of a difference though? Because it comes back to what we just talked about, right? Where it's like, I feel like, like when these games get ported to PC, right? It costs a certain amount of money. to get them ported. We don't know how much. I really don't know how long it takes or what the investment there is,
Mhm.
but obviously it's got to be pretty good in terms of cost versus return. But like, how many copies did Ratchet and Clank sell on PC? Right? Is selling another handful of million copies on Xbox going to be enough to then be like, this is profitable now? This is now a sustainable model. I don't know that it is, and like I think it comes down to this idea that like you need to just rein these budgets in and you need to rein in like how much you're spending on graphics and fidelity and like cut some of the bloat out of some of these games, because I mean, I look like something like Spider-Man, right? Like that's a pretty good length. Like that is, I think, probably about what you want out of one of these kinds of games, or it's like 20, 30 hours or whatever. So like, I don't know how much fat there is to trim content wise, but like that game is gorgeous. It looks incredible. And like it probably could look like 25% worse and it would still be a fantastic game. And yeah, maybe I wouldn't say, oh, it's the prettiest game on PS5, but like, so what? Like, that's visuals and fidelity and all that stuff. It's like it's a nice to have. It should be a nice to have, not a like this is what we're hanging our hat on. And I just don't think that that moves units the way that like you think it does, right? Like it's like quality gameplay and story and like those are the things, right? Like it's like what are the two, game of the year contenders this year? Like really when you get down to it, are Tears of the Kingdom and Baldur's Gate 3. Neither of those are games that are cutting edge in graphics. They're cutting edge in gameplay, in story, in narrative, in, you know, uh things that are like cost effective. Right? Because it's like it doesn't cost more money to write a good story than a bad story. You just need to pay. I mean, I guess it literally does, but like you get what I'm saying, right? Like it's like
Mhm.
story is quality, character, those kinds of things are things that are just like you just invest the time and you get them right, right? It's not like oh, we need to invest a certain amount of money over a certain number of years to develop in 4K, right? Where it's like maybe games don't need to be in 4K. It's like we're already at a point where most games cannot do 4K 60. So maybe that's part of the problem, right? Like what if we just agreed games will look worse and like we just
The
move
thing
on
is, though,
from
I don't
there?
think I don't think that'll wash. I really don't. I
I
think
know.
the problem PlayStation's got itself into, right, is everyone thinks of a PlayStation game and they've got a specific type of game in
Cutting
mind. It's
edge
just
blockbuster, third
yeah,
person action narrative. Yes.
exactly. And I think Jim was right in trying to get a break out of that mold in doing something different. I just don't think live service was the answer. It should have been, let's invest more in indie titles and making those exclusive. Let's do smaller things like Hi-Fi
That's
Rush and
that's so
Pentiment and
tough
stuff.
too, though, because you look at the Xbox side of things, and those things are not system sellers. They don't move units, and they don't sell that much. They get critical acclaim, but they don't. And it's like, is that better? Like, I don't know. It's like we saw them do that in the PS3 era, and I think that was a big part of what helped claw the PS3 back from
Mm.
failure was that they had a really attractive, diverse library of interesting games you could only play on PlayStation, and that was everything from big budget AAA to smaller indie titles. And like maybe that is the answer, but also like I get not thinking that that's the answer because like they bought Pixel Opus and they had them make Concrete Genie and like did that set the world on fire? No, right? So it's like, so then what are you doing? Are you like looking for partnerships like Xbox has with Cuphead and like Studio MDHR or like the Ori folks and it's Moon and it's like it's not an exclusive, but we'll spend money to help you develop it and then it comes out everywhere else
I
anyway.
kind of think that they should. Like, I think they should do that, and it's worked wonders for Nintendo. Like, it's become a console exclusive on a Switch for like a year, and then it comes to other platforms. Like, why not? You know,
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I
all you gotta do is get that one hit, you know? Imagine if Vampire Survivors was
yeah.
exclusive to PlayStation or Hades was exclusive to PlayStation for a year.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
I feel you. That's true. And they
you're
clearly
going
don't
and you're like,
give those
this is the
resources
place
to
I can
indie.
play it." No, no,
Like
they
there
don't.
was that whole article about how they don't do that and they, cost more money to get your games featured on PlayStation and all that shit. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's a good argument that like cultivating more diverse,
Yeah.
interesting budget titles is the way to go.
May
Um,
or maybe services is the way to go because their services revenue was up, obviously led by a massive price hike on PlayStation Plus that a lot of people
but
revolted against, but some people just sucked up and paid.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? As we talk about that too, right? Is like that's what you do when you raise prices. You raise them enough that the margin of people that drop off are made up for by the increase in cost.
Oh,
But
yeah, you just gotta look what Disney Plus is doing. They're doing the exact
sure,
same thing. Oh, there's oh, now
mhm.
there's ads there. It's like, "Oh, okay.
Yeah, you want the free
How long
version.
before we get ad-supported games?" No, that's what I wanna know.
I don't know. I think as soon as somebody figures out a model that's relatively non-intrusive, that'll
I mean,
be
Fortnite kind of is that at this point. It's
kind
like
of yeah, right? And that's like it's like a little different because it's more like native ads, which is like a whole other
yeah.
kinda grosser, honestly, because it doesn't
It's like,
like
"Here's a Lady Gaga concert. Go have fun."
right, and it's like, "This is a commercial, but I'm in the game." It's not like when you're watching something and it's like, "Pause, here's some ads." It's like, that's annoying, but I think it's more ethical, because it's
I can
like
put my controller down, I can go get a drink, I can
well, and
chill
you're, like,
out.
aware that it's an ad, right?
Mm,
Where it's like as a child especially, right? It's like you don't know what's an ad and what's not sometimes, it's like you're just being fed content, and it's like
yeah.
it it
I
tricks
honestly
you.
don't know why someone's not done it. You know, you're waiting in a lobby for, like, Call of Duty or whatever. Why are they not showing me an advert? I'm just sat there.
I think it's because it's a miserable experience and nobody wants it.
Yeah,
I think
but, you know.
especially young people are really just hate ads because they're not used
Yeah, oh,
to it,
yeah.
like,
Uh,
we don't like
I don't know, like, have you seen mobile apps? Like,
yeah, for sure.
riddled. Like,
Yeah, but
I
they're
really
free.
yeah, that's what I mean, but, like, that's what I'm on about the free games, Call of
Yeah,
Duty,
yeah.
Warzone, or whatever, like,
Oh, it'll
it's just
happen,
in
man.
there.
I mean, I think it's a matter of time. I think it's a matter of someone figuring out what that looks like before it becomes a standard thing, and it's gonna be awful.
Yes, it
But
is, yeah.
is what it is, right?
Yeah. I mean, were you upset by some of these canceled games? Because obviously we spoke about the Spider-Man one. We
You know what,
learned
Steve? We're going to
today.
talk about that in just a second. But let me remind you that
Okay.
this episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of February. For the last time, they are Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobe, Snackigo, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and also Boobies, Ty the Dude, and Waka Hula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/FlipScreenGames. You all the real to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of independent media like us. Thank you for your support. We couldn't do it without you. Remember, if you want to show your support just like they did, or if you just want to get involved in the community, check out some of our sister shows. Any of the ways you can get involved, head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you can find links to all the places we are all over the web, all the ways you can get involved, whether you want to write into the show with your thoughts on today's episode, whether you want to write in with a topic for next week, or if you want to just say hi, keep the conversation rolling between episodes. However you choose to get involved or show your support, we thank you for tuning in to another episode. So to answer your question, Steve, no, I'm not disappointed by the cancellation of. I'm disappointed by the cancellation of exactly one of these games,
Is
and
it
it's
Twisted
Twisted
Metal?
Metal. It's
Yeah, yeah.
Twisted Metal because I like Twisted Metal, right? Like that is a old school PlayStation franchise that I definitely have a lot of affection for, and I think similar to what we talked about with Helldivers, I think a budget Twisted Metal game that has a live service element is a really good idea if it's done by the right studio. So, granted, this game, based on what Jason has reported, is like it was not far along. It hadn't even been properly greenlit. They were still like kind of developing the pitch, and it just didn't
What is
materialize.
so wild now is that they've got a Twisted Metal TV show and no game to accompany it. And I
It's
I
so
wonder
funny.
how many people don't even realize that Twisted Metal was a game and they've seen that show on Paramount Plus.
Yeah, I don't know. It is interesting. So that was the game that was in development at FireSprite. So that game's canceled and they're getting people laid off too. So,
Mhm.
hopefully that means that they're gonna get pulled off and put on another project and they can, keep things moving over there. But I would be a little concerned if I was them. But
Oh, yeah, massively. I mean, they were also the team that was behind,
call them out.
Horizon Call of the Mountain. So, like, it's not looking good for VR there. Obviously, London Studios unannounced new IP project that's listed on their website, completely canned now. Don't know what's gonna happen with that.
Hey, it's done. It's dead. That's what's happened with that, right? That's going to be one of the, we had the statement from Herman and he said sometimes great ideas don't become great games. Sometimes a project is started with the best intentions before shifts in the market or industry result in a change of plan. Yeah, man.
Why is it that Herman's statement sounds more genuine than Jim's?
Cuz
Jim's
Herman
sounds like
cuz Herman Hulst makes video games. That's why.
and also Jim's out the door, he's like, "I don't really give a shit about any of
Yeah.
you."
I
I'm
mean, that's
going.
true. That's
Goodbye.
true for sure. But again, it's like I think this is like the thing that I always advocate for, which is that I think when you have people in C-level positions that have never made a video game or don't play video games, it's only going to be bad, right? It's like someone
Well,
like
it really read like Jim Ryan had looked at the P&L sheet and gone, "What games make money on our platform? Oh, it's FIFA, it's Call of Duty. Why are they making money? It's these microtransactions. How can we do that? We should be doing that."
yeah, right. Because again, and like I try not to get up on a soapbox and just like bitch about capitalism when things like this happen, but here's where we are. So I
Here
hope you're
comes
with me.
Commie Pete.
Just stick with me. Yeah, whatever. I am. Um, this is the problem with the fact that over the last 40 years, right, we developed this idea that quote unquote business is a skill, right? That you can go to business school and learn how to quote unquote do business. And that doesn't actually work because if the only goal you have as a company is to just make money and to just move money around, this is what happens, right? You have artificial increases or decreases in the market and you overreact to them, and then shit like this happens, right? You have video game companies, and like look at Nintendo. Look at Nintendo for a point of comparison, right? What has Nintendo done over the last several years, right? While they were enjoying record sales of their hardware and software, they amassed a huge pile of money. They invested more money in development. They hired more people and they've delayed their console to set it up for the most stable, healthy launch that they can. And what is the key thing that they're deciding to do as part of that? It's secure more software for the launch. That's what it is,
Mhm.
right? So to see on the other side of that fence, right? Companies like Sony and Microsoft take these last couple of years, and Microsoft can afford to do it because they are the most one of the most profitable companies in the world, so they can go and spend $60 billion to solve a problem like this. Fine. Sony does not have that kind of money. And what did they do? They took all those record profits and all these great margins and they invested a ton of money in something that is just chasing a trend. It's not innovating, it's not creating the next big thing, it's chasing the last big thing. And that is what business teaches you to do, right? Of like you said, let's look, oh, why aren't we in this microtransactions business? That's where all the money is. It's like, right. And did you talk at all about how much it costs to develop a game like that? And then how much resources you need to develop to maintain a game like that and have a roadmap? Obviously, they didn't because that's exactly why the fucking Last of Us game was canceled, right? Was that it
I
was
also think that game just probably wasn't very fun.
it was not fun, was what we were told. And also, again, part of Bungie's assessment, though, that we talked about from that report was that they didn't have plans for what it looked like to maintain and monetize it and support it after the fact. That's not going to work. And it's just like
Mhm.
Naughty Dog said it in their fucking blog post. You need to orient your entire studio around maintaining one game. That's the only way that you can do this. And that is a level of investment that doesn't make sense for a company of Sony's size. It just doesn't. You can't invest the amount of money you need to invest to make a game like that in several different studios and then be like, "Oh, let's hope they work out." Right? It's like that's ridiculous. And I think it leads to shit like this, where it's like you have a studio in Guerrilla that put out one of your most successful games on your new hardware, right? They're one of your crown jewel studios. They just had 10% of their staff laid off. They only have successes to their name in recent memory, right? Their last
10%
two
was 40
games.
people, which I could not believe. I thought they would have been a much larger studio.
I mean, they probably have two teams of 200, right?
It's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive.
It just, I think it, when you talk about impressive, man, it just, it blows my fucking mind how much work Insomniac gets done.
How big are they? That's 600 now?
Well, probably less now, but yeah, right? I think they had ballooned up to three teams.
Mhm.
So, and I mean, you know, like I don't know. I don't know what that percentage is going to look like when you're talking about removing all these people from the Spider-Man project, and whether there was like crossover between Spider-Man 3 and that team and who knows, right? But like, yeah, I mean, they've got a Spider-Man project, a Wolverine project, and then ostensibly, there's that on the
Possibly a
roadmap.
Venom one as well.
Yeah, well, and I'm thinking that's like they had that team. There was the team that did Miles while they were working on Spider-Man 2. I imagine it's like you have the main Spider-Man team, you have that team. Maybe that's the team that's working on Wolverine, though. I don't know. It's like
Does Venom come out this year, do you think? After the announcement that no games in existing franchises are coming out? Are they saying that that's a different franchise, or do you think that they're just saying that that's not coming out?
I don't know honestly what to make of that statement, because I think it reads weird to me, because it's like the existing franchises thing feels pointed. It feels like you wouldn't say existing franchises if you just meant we're not releasing anything. So I'm wondering if that means a new IP potentially is revealed. I think that's possible, right? Like, I mean, you look at how far into the PS5 we are now. We're 5 years in, and we haven't had a new IP really, except for Returnal, right? So like the idea that
And
they
even then,
could,
that wasn't theirs at the beginning. It was,
right? Yeah,
it
they
was a
they
third
bought
party.
that studio after the fact, right?
Mm.
So it's like, with that in mind, it's like, we know that like Corey um Barlog. I wanted to say Balrog, which is a monster from the Lord of the Rings. um, his team has been working on a game, right? Like since the end of God of War. So the idea that like that game could be done. That 2018 was a long time ago now, right? Like that's 6 years ago.
Possibly. I don't think it's coming out this year, though. I think we'd have heard about it if it was.
Maybe, I don't know, because it's like I'm inclined to agree, but it's also like, like we've talked a lot about how it's like me does shorter cycles of promotion, like, is that better for a game? Like,
Yeah, maybe. Maybe you get all the shit news like this out of the way at the beginning, and then you're just like, right, all that's done and dusted. Here's the good stuff. Maybe they're using some at Game Fest for it, and they're going to be a
yeah,
part
and
of
like
that.
that's my thought, because like you and I talked about this, because there's like after that report came out, Jeff Grubb came out and was like, "Oh, I've heard they're still putting out an Astrobot game. Like I've heard that that's still coming. That's still in active development." I mean, that's also something that could have happened, right? Like, obviously they saw a dip in their stock after this announcement, and like,
Massive dip.
right. So you and I talked about that, and it's like, well, what would be the impetus to lie then, right? Like when you want to say you had things coming so that
You
you could
can like if you get caught lying, I think you're gonna get in big trouble with investors.
remove the word lie, right?
Mm.
Maybe that's hyperbolic. My point is, there are many times where investor meetings happen and they detail plans, and then those plans are not actually what happens, right? So like,
Yeah, I do think plans change, but I also think that I don't know. I don't think you'd have said that statement if it wasn't true
yeah,
because it makes a dent in your stock.
for
They
sure.
took a dive back down to where they were at the beginning of December.
So, but that's my question to you though, right? Is like, so they took a dive back to where they were at the beginning of December, right? That is coming off of a historical high, right? Like the last quarter was a high quarter for them. So maybe the strategy in their mind, right, is like, hey, we had a really successful quarter, right? We know that we need to reduce sales projections, and that's going to make our stock take a hit. And we want to get out in front of all this bad news because we're not confident that X or Y thing is going to come out, or we're not confident that this is going to happen, or whatever. But a couple months from now, where maybe that confidence is like they feel more able to make a statement like that. To your point, they come out at a Summer Games Fest and they have a trailer for a big game that is, even if it's not coming out this year, maybe it's coming out next year, maybe, whatever, right? And they have things like that that they can hang their hat on, that they feel more confident revealing because they're more sure that it'll happen, right?
Mhm.
And then that will be what they need to bring their stock back up, right? That it's like, hey, like we have these things now that we're confident. Because like again, you look at like how much they've talked about in the last few years that has now been canceled, right? And it's like,
I know. I'm really curious as to what's going on with Jade Raymond's
because
studios.
you
Is going
you
to be
like
another
don't
one?
you don't need to say stuff like that in every, like, yeah, you have to tell investors what you're, but like you don't need to be like, this is every active project we have in development. That's not how that works,
I
right? So
mean,
it's like,
Nintendo doesn't. They keep cards very close to their chest, and then they're just
exactly.
like, "We have nothing to talk about right now."
Exactly. So
But people
my
still wanna invest in Nintendo because they're an extremely valuable company. They've got all this money in the bank. Everyone knows where their kind of plans are going. I
totally.
don't feel like I have any clue where PlayStation's plans are going, and I don't feel like they really have any clue where their plans are going.
No, and I'm inclined to agree. And I think the reason that I would the reason that I am not confident to say I definitely don't think anything's coming. I definitely don't think Venom's this because like I can think of ways that you position that and you say, well, we didn't think anything was, but now it is, and blah blah. Like these companies get slippery with stuff like this, and it happens all the time. You just brought up how many times has Nintendo been like, we have nothing to announce, and then they announce multiple games that year, right? Like when we were looking at investor calls from Nintendo from last year, we didn't. It wasn't like, oh yeah, Super Mario Wonder's coming out. We're putting out a 2D Mario. That's not how that
Mm.
works, right? Like you need to keep things like that close to your chest for marketing beats. If you say it in an investor call, it's public information. IGN's reporting on it. You missed your moment. And I think like that is where that gets interesting to me. Is like I think I'm inclined to agree with you that like I probably wouldn't say that in those terms if I did have something planned, but also
I don't know, when it comes along with massive layoffs, comments from the kind of interim CEO talking about how they need to maximize,
profitability.
margins and potentially explore onto other platforms, it's not a good look, and
No,
clearly VR2 was a failure, and, I mean, if you bought one of those, you've gotta be feeling really upset about your purchase at this point, like,
this is
it's
such a
clear
like
that there's no other games are coming for it.
such a PSP to PS Vita situation, like so clearly, right? Where it's like first one's a success. Let's run it back and make a better one. Oh no, we made some mistakes in the marketing or in the development and it costs too much or it has this problem or it has that problem and DOA, we're going to give up. Cuz it's like they haven't cut the price, they haven't tried to make
So
partnerships. Like
what
they
what
barely
do you
talk about
do?
the fucking
Because there's
thing.
nothing to play on it, Pete, like, there's, like,
I
nothing.
know. I know. And that's the thing is like it's they sent it out to die. I think they knew that it was going to fail and that's is what it is, right? Sucks for the people that bought one, but it is what it is, right? And it's like I get them wanting to move away from that because I think that market is dying. I'm very confident. I said this to you privately earlier. I'm of the opinion that the best case scenario for VR right now is that Meta and Apple stay in the VR business. I think it's far more likely that we see a repeat of what happened in the 90s when we had our first push for consumer VR and it comes up and a bunch of people get in the game and VR cafes start spinning up and they're everywhere and it's a thing and
I actually think the VR cafes and, like, large scale VR probably will stick around, and it'll become more niche like that, that you go to, like, a place and it's an event, you use a headset like you do at the
yeah,
Mario World, you know?
I think that is a far more likely path forward is that you see companies like Disney and Universal and those kinds of places investing in those kinds of experiences. But I think what the problem with the VR cafes and stuff like that, because like they have them, they're all over the place again. But that was a thing in the 90s. And guess what? What happens when they stop making software? Because it's too
Mm.
expensive to make and nobody buys it. Like that's where we're at, right? Like Sony just closed their dedicated VR studio, excuse me. How many studios exist that still make dedicated VR games? Because I think it's probably almost none at this point. It's
There
it's
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 the
probably
handful that are
ones
owned by a
owned by
company that
Meta.
right.
Yeah.
And every other
There's
one is
there's a
like gone.
few. There are
Or they've
there's
or
a
they've pivoted
couple.
away.
Yeah.
Because even
The
think
the
about like and like obviously there's a whole controversy with Justin Roiland and all that and whatever. But
mm.
like High on Life, right, was that studio's second game. They had made nothing but VR titles before that, and they specifically said the reason that they made that not a VR title was because the games didn't sell and they wanted to reach a bigger audience. And it's
Yeah,
just
which is
like,
fair enough. I mean, I think that I could see Valve come out with something that is a product that people are interested in with the success of the Steam Deck, but, that's a conversation maybe for another day that we kinda
yeah,
debate out VR.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is like, I think you're right that like a company like that coming in could be a shot in the arm. But I think then they have to invest in software. They have to be willing to make a Half-Life Alex like every couple of years to justify you buying it. Otherwise, it's like,
To
what's
buy
the
one?
point?
Why did you not go to Valve and say, "Can we have Half-Life Alyx?" Like,
Maybe
we'll
they
give
did.
you we'll give you the PSVR 2 for PC, and we'll bring our games to PC and Steam, but we want
Yeah,
Half-Life Alyx.
I don't. I mean, and you and I disagree about this, but sometimes anyway. I don't think Valve would want it. Why would Valve want to give away their best exclusive? That is the selling point of their VR headset over other people's VR headset is they have one of
I
the
mean, you can
only
use any VR headset with Steam.
yeah,
So you can use the Quest, you can use the
sure.
HTC Vive or whatever. So, but is there big one on Steam, and it's the reason why you come to Steam
It's
and
their
PC
killer app.
VR. Yeah,
And that's the
I
thing is
mean,
no really like pretty much no other VR headset has a killer app like that where it's like, "Oh, this is one of the best games in VR and we're the only place you can get it." Like that doesn't
yeah,
really it's not really a thing, you know? And it's like I guess Beat Saber or whatever, right? Stuff like that, but it's like that's come everywhere now, you know? And it's like
yeah, that's even on PSVR too. Yeah,
right. So it's like, like how many like if I'm here and I'm like I want to get into the VR market, right? Like it's like the Quest is obviously the best option for budget. So why would you pick Valve's if not for the fact that it has exclusive games or that it's better technology or whatever, right? And it's like that is their selling point. But I
I
think
don't think
as
the
you
Quest, but
see,
I think the Quest is only the better option at the moment. I think
yeah, as and
because
and,
of the
and it's
price.
budget.
Yeah,
But I think that's really important because it's like we're in a recession, right? Like it's like there's less money to go around. We're just talking about how video games cost too much money. Like, do
mm,
you really want to buy a $500 plus, $300 plus
no.
accessory so that
What
you
about
can
three and a
play?
half grand for the Apple
Yeah.
one? No, I
And that
don't.
doesn't even have games on it yet. And then again, right, so that you can play these games that are like, I think, no offense, inferior. They are. They're not as good as real video games. So it's like, why would you spend all this money on something that's just like it's just the experience is just not there? And it's like, what are you paying for? And I think that
Mm.
made sense in 2016 or 15 or whatever, when all these headsets were coming out and people had more money to throw around and there was excitement about the technology and it was this new avenue of games. And it's like, I mean, how many years into VR? This round of VR of consumer tech, all the big players have either fallen away or they've iterated on their device two or three times at this point, and there just isn't a market there. Not the way that they thought there would be. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's why Sony's getting out of the business, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think they got in. They probably started working on that when it was the year the Quest 2 was the best-selling item that Christmas, right?
And
And
the
then
PSVR was a huge success. So like of
yeah,
course they wanted to make another one.
but then you get to the point where everyone's like, "Oh, but the Quest Pro sucked. No one really cares anymore. Like, we're done with it." But at that point, you've already got the product. You're kind of like, "Ugh, we better sell this thing."
And again, I think part of that is also that I think VR experiences are trending away from video games because
Mm.
they cost too much. And again, frankly, they're not the best experience. I think there are a lot more interesting applications of VR that don't have anything to do with video games. And like you're seeing that with Apple, right? Like they're trying to double down on it as like a work
It's
device,
a
as a
general
home.
computing device,
Yeah.
yeah, like, yeah.
And I'm not saying that like that can't happen and that might, but like, what does that mean for PlayStation? Nothing good. They don't want that. That's not the market they got into. They got into it to put games out on it. And it's clearly just like the investment is not worth the return. And I think when you're over investing in VR, you're over investing in games as a service, you're over investing in the games you make that
Mm.
actually sell. Yeah, no shit, there's a fucking cash flow problem. They're throwing this money around in all these different directions and not seemingly not having a plan for when it actually comes back, and I get with VR2 there being like a sunk cost of like, well, we developed it, so we'll put it out and it's going to flop and we're going to make whatever we're going to make back on it. And if we're surprised and it does well, we'll support it. But like, I just don't think that
Yeah,
was
it's not great. I mean, the funny thing with Sony is you gotta zoom out a little bit, right? Like, there's 2 sides of the business. There's the PlayStation side, but then there's also the Sony side that is the consumer electronics company that
TVs and
makes these products, and they are the ones that are making the boxes and making the headsets. So, some of this R&D and stuff that went into PSVR 2, I'm sure they can use it for something else. Like, I can imagine, like,
they could
they'll
probably
s
sell the technology to Quest or somebody else, right? Like
yeah.
that happens all the
Sell the
time.
little screens that are inside of there or
Yeah.
whatever it is, the haptics feedback on there.
Right.
Because Sony are the ones that are making, like, the camera sensors in everyone's phones. Like, I can
Mhm.
imagine will see that technology elsewhere, and they'll probably recuperate their costs somewhere else that's
Yeah.
not an end user product.
I think you're probably right, but yeah, it's like I don't know. You come back to this space of like they need to be innovating. They need to not just be copying, right? Like one of the stories that we were going to talk about this week that we're not going to get to is that like there was a statement from them saying that the PlayStation Portal ended up being more popular than they expected. And I think that's a great example of what I'm talking about, right? Like I was the only person on this channel on these shows in the comments that was like this product could be for somebody, right? And like that's all it needs to be. It needs to be for somebody if it comes out at the right price in terms and not the right price for like mass market, the right price for the people that want this can afford it and the margin of profitability is there, which clearly
Mhm,
it is, right? Like it was very successful, more successful than they expected. It's been sold out for months. They're trying to keep up with it. That was an innovation. And it was an innovation that when it came out, it got the same reaction that a lot of innovative products do, which is who is this for? Why would anybody buy this? Blah blah blah. But it's like that's the job of an R&D company, of a company that makes products is to see a need and fill that need, right? Nobody knew that they needed a Walkman until Sony invented it. And that's what made them, right? Like if you're not innovating, what are you doing? Like you're just chasing other people's ideas and you're just going to get diminishing returns. And it's like, again, we look at Nintendo. Who's the most stable, comfortable of the big three right now? It's the most innovative of them right now because the
mhm,
Switch was a unique, interesting, dynamic idea that spoke to its market and they make good, high quality, dynamic software. And Sony makes great hardware and makes great software, but like clearly there's an imbalance in how much they're spending versus how much they're charging or how much people are
I also
willing to
think sometimes
spend.
they look at the wrong things. Every single generation, there always is something that Mark Cerny's out there talking about that I'm just like, "Who gives a shit?" This time it was the Tempest 3D audio engine. Do you remember that? I swear to God, I have not heard about that since 2020. Not one single person has spoken about that since. And, like, it was meant to be the selling point for the headphones and, like, all these developers are gonna hack into it. There are so many features of the PS5 that I just do not think ever get utilized. Those weird little card things that are the activities that are meant to be able to jump to specific
And come
places in
on.
games
We
and,
knew
like
that was not going to be
yeah,
anything. And it's like, why did you spend money on it then? And it's like, I don't know. I think sometimes it's easy to like look at these things in hindsight and be like, this was a bad idea. This was a bad idea. But it's
no,
like,
but every single generation, they've gotta rebuild the entire operating system. Why? Just do what Xbox did and go, "Oh, it worked. Let's just maybe put a lick of paint on it and carry on." Imagine if literally every single time a new c like, Apple put a new phone out, they're just like, "Oh, we've redone the operating system again." You just be like, "Why? Why did you start from scratch?" Like, you had a base operating system. We didn't even get fucking folders at launch on the PlayStation. They came, like, last year, and it's just like, "Come on, man." Like, why? Why is that so difficult for you?
yeah, I think it's just like, and to put a pin on this, I think there's fundamentally just a little bit of that kind of like big business brain going on of like, we need to be expanding. We need to expand into new markets and expand. And it's just like, if your only goal is growth ever, then any amount of not growth is failure. And when you
Mhm,
have an artificial increase of growth, like that, this was inevitable. This was so predictable. And what did they do? Nothing. They did not plan for the future. They barreled ahead and invested a bunch of money in shit that didn't make sense. It didn't make sense when they spent the money on it. It doesn't make sense that they wasted that money now. Think about if they hadn't spent that $3 billion on Bungie, they hadn't invested that money in games as a service development, we would be talking about how Sony was sitting on a pile of $5 billion.
oh, or we'd have had some more single player games that we'd be enjoying right now, and I would have a reason to turn my PlayStation 5 on this year because for the second year running, there's nothing I wanna play. I don't care about Final Fantasy, so there is nothing for me to play on PlayStation 5 this year, and I didn't care about Spider-Man last year, which fair enough, a lot of people did. I had nothing to play last year, and I don't know what I'm gonna have to play next year. So for 2 years running, nothing. Like,
Potentially three.
yeah,
Which
ridiculous.
And again, it's like, I guess that's fine if you're talking about like somebody who only owns a PlayStation, which is a significant percentage of their market. But like, I don't. I own 3 consoles, and I'm not buying shit on my PlayStation right now. Right? Like, I bought like 2 games last year, and I'll probably buy 1 game this year. That's not good.
Yeah. And you're not subscribed to PS Plus, I presume?
No. Why would I? For what?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big problem for that. I mean, and why subscribe to PS Plus and, like, play Helldivers there if you've got a PC and I don't have to pay for the monthly subscription? It's just such a weird thing for me.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see, right? Like, unfortunately, I think that's been the takeaway from a lot of these episodes recently, where we're talking about the future of these companies, and it's just like,
Yeah.
I think the industry is heading for a really volatile couple of years, because you're seeing these companies that enjoyed record profits now panic because they can't keep up with that, and they're going to lay people off, and we're going to see a talent drain in the industry, and you're going to see a lot of really talented people move away from games and go work in app development and all this other shit, and it's going to really suck. And we're going to see, I think we're going to see more risk aversion. We're going to see less creativity. We're going to see less indie games getting greenlit. We're going to see more safe licensed games. And it's like, it's not good for any of us, and it's like that mentality of like, oh, I'm going to speak with my wallet. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And it's like, I mean, shit, man, like, we did that with microtransactions, and now it's like, I think it's gonna lead to a fucking huge down spiral after a period of really consistent growth for years, right? Like, from 2015, 2016 till now, there's been a really
Mhm.
steady, like, this is one of the best years in gaming. This is one of the best years in gaming. Record profits, record, critical acclaim, this, that, this, and now it's all about the bottom's gonna fucking fall out because we're laying all these people off. And what's going to happen in 6 years when there's no games to put out because you laid all these people off? These games take longer and cost more than they did,
I
and
mean,
you're and
imagine what
you're
the
and you're getting rid of
PS6 is
talent.
gonna look like. The PS6 is, like, what, 5 years away? 4 years away,
Probably
potentially?
5.
Yeah, I think they were targeting 2028, that's 4 years away, maybe 4 and a
Yeah, maybe you're
half if
right.
we're saying it's last half, but, I mean, the rumor is there's a PS5 Pro coming this year, but why would I buy
To
it?
what end, right? Like, for
What have
what?
you
What am
got
I
to play
buying it
on it?
for? To play what? My games run great anyway. I don't need it. We needed it for the PS4. We don't need it for the PS5. Hardware is not the problem.
Yeah, but they're a hardware company, and I think that is part of the problem.
Mhm. I don't know, man. It's a tough one. Software is what moves hardware, though, right?
Yeah.
It's not enough to just make a good box or make a good headset. Well, we know PSVR 2 is a great headset. So what? It's the same
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
PS5 games look great. There's not enough of them.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you see a return to form from like the PlayStation days, and they like drop the licensing fee to like nothing, and like they try to just like aggressively
Maybe you follow what Epic Games, right? And you say
enter
you will charge you,
margins.
like, yeah, 10% instead of 30 like Steam is. I don't know. I really don't know what they do because I don't think there's enough third-party exclusives that they can kind of funnel into the PlayStation to kinda keep it going at this point,
Would have
like,
been really cool if they had like $5 billion to spend on a company that made games that actually spoke to their audience. Who's
yeah.
crazy?
Look at all the Activision stuff. They ain't getting any of that exclusive anymore. That's over the fence. Bethesda, not getting any of that. So it's like, really, you've got EA, and they never seem to want to make exclusives. Maybe you could speak to maybe you could go speak to Embracer and see if you can give them some money to, like,
Please.
do something, but, like,
I
I
don't
don't
know,
know.
dude. I don't know. I don't know. It's a weird situation for sure. And I mean, we'll see what happens from here. I think at this point, it's like we're gonna see probably a lot more of this shit for the next couple of
Mm.
years.
And
And
you know where I hope we see it? Clean house on the C-suite at PlayStation. Get a new CEO in there and
mhm.
just be like, "Right, we're clearing out all of the mess, all of Jim
Herman,
Ryan's kind of
make
legacy
Herman the
gone."
CEO.
I don't know. Herman's responsible for managing PlayStation Studios, and this has happened. So I don't know
Yeah.
that I have a lot of faith there
Where do you
either.
like? Is that from top down though? Right?
Possibly.
Was that Jim Ryan's vision and he's executing? I don't know. Right? It's tough to say, but I would love to see somebody take that position that has a background in making games or caring about
Mhm.
games, at least in the way that like somebody like Phil Spencer seems to, right? Like,
Just Neil Druckmann, new CEO,
no, no,
PlayStation.
no, no. He's too busy. That guy's way too fucking busy. Don't do that. He's working on a lot right now. He's got his hands full keeping Naughty Dog afloat. Let's make sure that that happens first, huh? So we'll leave it there for today. Thank you guys for joining us on another episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast. Remember, if you want to write in with your thoughts about everything going on with Sony, if you want to write in with a topic for next week, if you want to check out any of our sister shows, show your support, become a Patreon producer, get the show early, all kinds of good perks and goodies, all that good stuff, head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website where you will find links to all the places we are all over the web. However you choose to get involved or show your support, we thank you for tuning in to another episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.